take two of my Viva because my first one had no sound. Really stupid. But we're back and we're here to learn how feudalism improved the lives of medieval Europeans. So although we often think of the feudal system as this oppressive relationship that harmed peasants and exploited the poor for the benefit of the aristocrats, the feudal system improved the lives of medieval Europeans by bringing order to a very chaotic world. So my first point is that feudalism improved the lives of the medieval Europeans because first, it protected the peasants from the dangers of early medieval life. Second, it established a larger, more stable political structure. And third, it gave a limit to the king's absolute power. So before we get into our first point, let's understand a little bit about what exactly feudalism is. So feudalism is a pretty recent and modern term, and it is used to describe a set of legal customs that flourished from the 9th to the 15th century, and it was a structure in which land was exchanged for service or labor. Mark Bloch defines the feudal society, saying the nobility, the clerics, and the peasantry in bonds of manorialism. So basically, there's not really one set definition of feudalism because it is a term that we gave this society later on. So there's not like one right definition, but basically it's this relationship in which there was like the king, lords and vassals, and then like peasants at the bottom. So it was a pyramid, and that's a really oversimplified version, but it's accurate, but it's not as complicated as the actual system was. So yeah, that was the feudal system. And this modern conception of the feudal system, really, we often think of it as just like peasants being exploited by the aristocrats. But feudalism lasted from the 9th to the 15th century. That's a pretty long time. And the reason it lasted that long is because it was good. It was beneficial to everyone in medieval Europe. So my first point is that feudalism protected peasants from the dangers of early medieval life. So why, if feudalism was unequal and it was something that was bad for the peasants, why did it work for so many centuries? The reason it worked for so many centuries is because the peasants were scared. Medieval Europe was a really hard place to live. Murder was just a fact of life. The murder rate and the dying of violence was 7 to 8 times higher than it is today. Lawrence Stone states that homicide levels in medieval England were at least 10 times what they are today. That's crazy. That's a lot of murder. So yeah, peasants were scared. And this feudal system provided protection for them in exchange for their work. Also, gangs ran rampant in Europe, and they could plunder, they could kill as much as they wished. So having a lord to protect you was really helpful. And then there's a story from the University of Oxford. In the 1340s, Oxford was a very dangerous place to live. The murder rate was 100 per 100,000, compared to the 1 per 100,000 murder rate today in the UK. So it was like 100 times higher than it is today. Just absolutely insane to live in a place like Oxford in the 1340s. And there's this story that college students were at a bar and they offended the bartender by telling him they didn't like his wine, and so he got really mad at them. There was a fight that happened, and all the town bells were rung, and then all the townspeople came and attacked the college students. So that's just a little story that kind of summarizes just how violent it was to live in medieval Europe. And so, yeah, stuff like the Code of Chivalry brought some order and some like limits to when and how violence could be used. And Dr. Hannah Skoda says that chivalry was a set of customs arising out of concern and a sense that violence could be a problem. So that's the first point. The feudal system provided protection for the peasants. Secondly, feudalism provided a more stable political structure than what medieval Europe had before. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. After the fall of the Carolingian era, there was this time when Europe didn't have a very stable political structure. So feudalism provided that. So in feudalism, lands were consolidated into the hands of the elite through marriage-based alliances, and new political entities that emerged from these alliances provided stability in Europe's politics. So George Comenel, I don't know. This George guy says that the transition to feudalism proper occurred due to the impact of the disintegration of the Carolingian state. So once the Carolingian state fell, Europe was unstable. One thing that's really interesting about how the Carolingians ran things was that Charlemagne, instead of having people pay taxes with money, people paid taxes with military service. So there was that setup of having protection. But once that empire fell, there wasn't protection for the empire, and Vikings came in, Hungarians came in, Muslims came in, and people needed that protection. So the elite group that formed in the feudal society, it provided that stability and protection. And a lot of the people married each other, and it was a good thing because, castles started building resistance to invaders, and could actually protect the common people more than the king ever could. So that's the second point, that it provided a stable political structure. And then thirdly, oh gosh, I hope this doesn't go to 10 minutes. I'm sorry if it does, Violet. Thirdly, feudalism led to the emergence of the aristocratic group, which sought to place limits on the absolute power of the king. So basically, kings, they owned everything. They were the absolute power, the highest authority. But in the feudal system, the aristocrats had power too, because the kings needed the support of the aristocrats underneath them. So they kind of had to get along and give the aristocrats their way, or else the kings would, their kingdoms would just fall apart. So there was the networks of, I don't know what I'm trying to say. The networks that were the aristocratic groups, there was a mutual obligation that was established. The class of aristocrats provided the monarch with military and financial backing, and in turn, the aristocrats' power gave counterweight to the king's absolute authority. And then there was this thing that Lisa Blade said. She says, the independent military power of the barons allowed for a degree of bargaining strength vis-a-vis the monarchy. So they could basically bargain their way through politics because they had just as much say as the king. Yeah, and one thing that shows this counterweight between the aristocrats and the king is the signing of the Magna Carta. In 1215, King John signed the Magna Carta, and the aristocrats kind of forced his hand at signing it, but it provided the basis for modern law, and basically a lot of the things in the Magna Carta gave the king less power and gave equality and protection for the people of the land. So, a quote from the Magna Carta says, "No free man shall be seized or imprisoned except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land." So basically, this was a really, really good thing. It made sure people got fair trial. It did a lot for the common people. So yeah, how did feudalism improve the lives of medieval Europeans? Well, I'll tell you. It gave protection to the peasants. It gave a stable political structure, and it provided a counterweight to the absolute power of the king. That's our Viva. If you're wondering what this is, apple, beet, and carrot juice. It's delicious.